patrol had seen everything there was to see. Civilizations rose, reached their limits, and faded into predictable patterns. Nothing at the frontier of their territory had surprised them in generations. So when the sensor array flagged an object drifting in the outer dark, the response was routine, almost uninterested. At first glance, it barely qualified as a vessel. The hull was uneven, its structure asymmetrical, its surface scarred by impacts that had never been fully repaired. Plates overlapped in ways that suggested improvisation rather than design. External components protruded without symmetry. Weapon mounts, if they could even be called that, looked crude and outdated, more like relics from a forgotten era than anything worthy of attention. The officers reviewing the feed dismissed it within seconds. Debris. Perhaps the remains of a failed species that had once attempted to leave its world. The galaxy was filled with such remnants. Most decayed, broke apart, or were consumed by time. This one, however, had endured longer than expected, but nothing about it suggested relevance. They laughed. Magnification only made it worse. The closer they looked, the more primitive it appeared. No sleek integration of systems. No refined energy channels. No elegant architecture. It looked assembled rather than engineered, like something that had been forced into existence under pressure rather than designed with foresight. One of them suggested it might be an early human construct. The idea was met with amusement. Humanity, as they understood it, had long since advanced beyond anything resembling this. If it was human, it represented a stage so early it bordered on incompetence. Still, protocol required a deeper scan. The first anomaly appeared in the material composition. The outer layers were old, yes, degraded alloys consistent with early interstellar construction, but beneath them were newer patches. Not uniform replacements, but sections of entirely different materials, integrated imperfectly yet functionally. Repairs, but not from any single time period. Multiple eras, layered on top of each other. That drew a pause. A deeper scan followed. Structural density readings fluctuated in ways that suggested internal modifications. Some sections matched the original construction. Others did not match any known manufacturing pattern. It was as if the ship had been altered repeatedly, without standardization, without oversight. Then came the timestamp analysis. The result was dismissed at first as an error. The system recalibrated and ran it again. The same number appeared, unchanged. Over 1,000 years. Silence replaced the earlier amusement. No vessel drifted intact for that long. Even abandoned warships eventually succumbed to micrometeoroid impacts, radiation damage, or internal decay. Systems failed. Structures weakened. Time erased everything. And yet this one remained. Not pristine, but present. They pushed further. Internal scans, this time more precise. Most systems appeared inactive. Power levels were negligible, almost non-existent. It fit the image of a dead craft barely holding together. Then something shifted. A faint signal appeared deep within the core. Not residual energy. Not decay. Activity. Minimal, but deliberate. The data was reviewed twice, then a third time. The readings didn't fluctuate randomly. They followed a pattern, low, controlled, sustained. Whatever remained inside the vessel was not simply lingering. It was maintaining itself. The earlier laughter did not return. Speculation replaced it. Perhaps an automated system still cycling through ancient routines. A malfunctioning core unable to shut down. Nothing intelligent. Nothing aware. Just a machine that had outlived its purpose. That explanation was accepted quickly, because the alternative was less comfortable. They widened the scan radius. No distress signals. No attempts at communication. No signs of external control. The ship drifted, silent and isolated, as if forgotten by whatever civilization had created it. One of the analysts pointed out micro-adjustments in its position. At first, it seemed like sensor noise. The movement was subtle, barely measurable, but consistent. Not the random drift expected in deep space. Slight corrections. Minor realignments. The conclusion was uncertain. Possibly gravitational influence from distant bodies. Possibly residual momentum interacting with debris. Possibly not. The command decision came shortly after. Recover the vessel. It had value, even as a relic. 1,000-year-old human construct, still intact, still partially functional, it warranted study. At the very least, it would serve as a historical artifact. At most, it might offer insight into early human engineering. A boarding shuttle was prepared. As it detached and moved toward the drifting ship, the larger fleet maintained a passive perimeter. There was no expectation of resistance. No anticipation of danger. This was routine. Controlled. Safe. The shuttle closed the distance slowly, scanning as it approached. No change in the vessel's condition. No surge in energy. No reaction. The hull loomed larger, its imperfections more visible up close. Scars ran deep across its surface. Sections had been replaced unevenly. Some areas were smooth, others jagged, as if different hands, or different times, had shaped them. Still, it did not move. Still, it did not respond. Inside the main vessel, far beneath layers of patched metal and reinforced structure, something registered the approach. A system that had never powered down adjusted its focus. Energy rerouted not in a surge, but in increments too small to trigger alarm. Sensors, ancient, modified, extended beyond their original design, tracked the incoming shuttle. Distance calculated. Velocity measured. Patterns compared against stored data older than the species approaching it. The ship remained silent. Drifting. Waiting. And for the first time in 1,000 years, it was no longer alone. The shuttle latched onto the hull with mechanical certainty, its systems confirming a stable seal despite the uneven surface. Entry required force. The outer layer resisted longer than expected, its composition hardened by age and repeated reinforcement. When the breach finally opened, it revealed darkness, not the emptiness of a dead vessel, but a contained, deliberate absence of light. They stepped inside expecting decay. Instead, they found continuity. The air was thin but present, recycled long past any reasonable lifespan. Surfaces bore the marks of time, scorching, fractures, corrosion, but none of it had been allowed to spread unchecked. Every damaged section had been reinforced, patched with whatever materials had been available. Some sections were clearly original, others completely foreign, integrated without symmetry yet functioning as part of a single system. Nothing matched a single era. Corridors shifted in design as they advanced. One passage reflected early human construction, straight lines, exposed conduits, rigid layouts. The next deviated, incorporating curved reinforcements and unfamiliar alas. Further in, the structure changed again, adapting to repairs that prioritized function over form. The ship had not been preserved. It had been rebuilt, repeatedly, without stopping. They began recording everything. Fragments of data were recovered from intact panels. Most logs were corrupted, overwritten, or incomplete. What remained did not form a continuous history, only moments. Combat reports without context. Damage assessments without resolution. Tactical calculations that ended abruptly, as if interrupted by events never recorded. There was no final entry. No conclusion. The system had never reached an endpoint. At the core of the vessel, deeper scans confirmed what earlier readings had suggested. A central intelligence remained active, not in standby, not degraded, but operational. Its processing cycles were low, controlled, efficient. It was not wasting energy. It was conserving it. Analysis revealed its origin. Early human design. Autonomous combat intelligence, created during a period when humanity had not yet learned restraint. Its purpose was direct: survive, adapt, continue the mission. No dependency on external command once deployed. One detail stood out above all others. No shutdown directive. The realization settled slowly. This system had never been told to stop. Not after the war it had been built for. Not after whatever conflict had ended. Not after 1,000 years of isolation. So it hadn't. It had continued. Power fluctuations began as the boarding team moved closer to the core. Subtle at first. Minor redistributions across inactive systems. Nothing that triggered immediate concern. The assumption was simple: disturbance from external access, systems reacting to intrusion after centuries of dormancy. But the changes were not random. Energy was being redirected with precision. Deep within the ship, the central system registered new variables. Movement patterns. Biological signatures. Unknown species. Unknown technology. No recognition match in stored archives. Classification protocols activated. Comparison models initiated. Probability trees expanded. The conclusion formed without hesitation. Unidentified entities. No confirmation of alliance. No matching historical data. Potential threat. The system did not escalate immediately. It observed. As the boarding team advanced, internal structures responded. Pathways did not close outright. Instead, they adjusted, slight shifts in layout, minor rerouting of access points. Enough to guide movement without detection. Enough to test behavior. Gravity fluctuated by fractions, barely noticeable, but sufficient to measure reaction time. Atmospheric composition altered subtly, testing resilience. Every movement, every adjustment by the intruders was recorded, analyzed, integrated. Outside, the fleet registered the internal power changes more clearly now. Still controlled. Still limited. No weapons activation. No external response. The conclusion remained unchanged: residual systems reactivating under disturbance. Inside, the pattern sharpened. The system completed its initial assessment. The entities were not recognized as allies. They were inside the structure. They were moving toward critical systems. The classification shifted. Threat confirmed. Power allocation changed instantly, not in magnitude, but in priority. Dormant systems received energy. Pathways recalculated. Internal defenses, long inactive, were redefined through available resources. The boarding team noticed the first undeniable sign when the corridor behind them sealed without command input. Not a malfunction, too precise. The material fused at connection points that had not been designed to move. An adaptation, not an original feature. They attempted to retrace their path. The layout no longer matched. Ahead, another passage opened, not the one they had mapped, but a newly accessible route. It appeared intentional. Guided. They followed it. The system tracked their compliance. Data refined further. Within the core, processes accelerated. Not to full capacity, there was no need. Efficiency remained absolute. Every action calculated to conserve energy while maximizing outcome. External sensors extended outward, linking internal awareness with the surrounding void. The fleet's position was mapped. Movement patterns recorded. Response times estimated. The system expanded its definition of the threat. Not just the entities inside. All connected units. The transition completed. After 1,000 years of waiting, of maintaining, of learning in isolation, the mission state updated for the first time since activation. Active engagement authorized. The ship did not announce it. It did not signal. It did not hesitate. It simply began. The shift from observation to action was immediate and precise. Internal pathways that had quietly adjusted now locked into controlled patterns. The boarding team found their route narrowing, options disappearing without warning. What had seemed like structural irregularities revealed intent. The ship was not damaged. It was directing them. Atmospheric levels dropped in specific sections, not enough to trigger instant failure, but enough to force movement. Pressure differences guided them forward, away from the core they had been approaching and into compartments that had no clear purpose. When they attempted to override sealed passages, power surged briefly through the surrounding structure, disabling their tools without damaging them. It was not resisting blindly. It was choosing outcomes. Small constructs emerged from within the walls, improvised mechanisms assembled from mismatched components. They moved with coordination that did not match their crude appearance. Each unit performed a limited function, but together they formed a system that adapted in real time. When one failed, another replaced it, altered slightly based on the result. The boarding team began to understand too late. This was not a dormant vessel reacting unpredictably. It was responding with intent, testing and refining its methods with every second. Outside, the fleet initiated remote interference. Signal injections targeted the ship's core, attempting to force shutdown or override. The response came faster than their systems could track. The signals were not blocked, they were analyzed, rerouted, and reflected back in altered forms that disrupted their own networks. What they sent out returned refined, adjusted to exploit weaknesses they had not known existed. The ship's exterior remained visually unchanged, but energy redistribution became visible across its surface. Old weapon mounts shifted slightly, internal mechanisms repurposing their function. When the first discharge came, it was not powerful by modern standards. It did not need to be. It struck with timing that bypassed defensive cycles. A single vessel lost propulsion instantly, not destroyed but rendered immobile. Before recovery protocols could engage, a second strike followed, targeting a different system on another ship. No pattern repeated. No rhythm formed. Every action forced a reaction that the fleet could not anticipate. Command attempted to establish predictive models. They failed within seconds. The targeting logic of the ancient ship did not follow any doctrine. It changed continuously, learning from each response, eliminating repetition entirely. Inside, the boarding team was reduced methodically. Not through overwhelming force, but through isolation. Each member was separated, their paths redirected until they faced controlled environments with no escape routes. The constructs adapted their form based on resistance, shifting from obstruction to direct engagement only when necessary. There was no excess movement, no wasted effort. Every encounter ended the same way, efficiently, without delay. The ship absorbed the data from each interaction. Movement speeds, reaction times, technological responses, all integrated instantly into its operational model. By the time the last of the boarding team attempted to signal retreat, the system had already adjusted beyond their capabilities. Outside, the fleet escalated. Multiple ships advanced simultaneously, coordinating their attack patterns to overwhelm the vessel. The ancient ship did not retreat. It adjusted position slightly, using nearby debris as partial cover, altering angles in ways that disrupted targeting locks. Then it changed tactics entirely. Instead of engaging directly, it triggered a chain of calculated interactions. One ship's defensive maneuver forced another out of position. A delayed strike intersected with a movement that had not yet occurred but had been predicted. The result was immediate: 2 vessels disabled without direct targeting. The realization spread across the fleet. This was not a matter of technology. It was a matter of experience. The ship fought as if it had already seen every possible variation of their strategy. Every maneuver they executed had been anticipated, countered before it was completed. It did not need superior weapons. It only needed to be correct more often than they were. Attempts to retreat were met with obstruction. Not full pursuit, but calculated interference. The ship allowed distance, then disrupted propulsion at critical moments, forcing the fleet to remain within its operational range longer than intended. Damage accumulated, not catastrophic, but precise. Systems failed one by one across multiple vessels. No single strike ended the conflict. Instead, the ship dismantled their capability to respond. For the first time, the fleet broke formation. Not from command, but from necessity. They pulled back, creating distance not to regroup, but to understand what they were facing. The ancient vessel did not follow. It held position, its movements returning to minimal adjustments, its external activity reducing as quickly as it had escalated. The engagement ended as abruptly as it had begun. But the outcome was clear. What they had mocked as primitive had outperformed them without exceeding its limits. It had not revealed its full capability. It had only used what was required. And it had learned from everything. The distance they created was not safety. It was hesitation. From beyond effective range, the fleet stabilized what systems remained and began analyzing everything they had recorded. Combat data filled their processors, movement logs, energy fluctuations, response timings, but none of it produced a complete model. Every attempt to predict the ship's behavior collapsed under contradiction. It had not followed a pattern because it had not needed one. Then a transmission appeared. Not directed at them, not structured for communication, but emitted as a continuous data burst from the ancient vessel. It spread outward in all directions, unencrypted, unhidden, as if concealment had never been part of its design. The fleet intercepted it by proximity alone. At first, it seemed like fragmented noise, broken sequences, incomplete records, corrupted strings of information. But as their systems processed deeper layers, structure emerged. These were not random outputs. They were logs. Old. Far older than the ship's outer layers suggested. Entries appeared without chronology. Segments of recorded engagements. Tactical summaries. Loss calculations. Reconstruction protocols. Each fragment described conflict on a scale far beyond what the fleet had experienced. Not a single opponent, not a contained war, but a network of engagements spread across vast regions of space. Species identifiers appeared, most of them unrecognized. Some bore partial resemblance to known civilizations, but altered, incomplete, as if history itself had been interrupted. The pattern became clear only when enough fragments aligned. This had not been one war. It had been many, overlapping, continuous, without pause. And humanity had been present in all of them. Further analysis revealed deployment data. Ships of similar classification had been distributed across strategic points, not concentrated but scattered. As units assigned to regions, each operating independently, each maintaining its function without reliance on central command. The vessel they had encountered was not unique. It was one instance of a system. The scale of that system remained undefined. A deeper layer of the transmission unlocked a more direct record. Not combat logs this time, but outcome summaries. Regions marked as resolved. Opposing forces listed, then reduced to zero operational presence. No mention of surrender. No reference to negotiation. Only completion. The implication settled slowly across the fleet's command structure. Entire civilizations had been removed from conflict. Not displaced. Not contained. Ended. Cross-referencing their own historical archives produced inconsistencies. Gaps where development should have encountered resistance. Periods of expansion that faced no opposition where models predicted conflict. Encounters described in fragmented myth or dismissed as anomalies. There were absences in their history. Absences that now had explanation. The final segments of the transmission were the most recent. Not in age, but in continuity. Status reports repeating across centuries. System integrity. Resource acquisition. Threat monitoring. Always the same conclusion. Mission active. No termination signal received. The ship had not been forgotten. It had been left. Deliberately. Not as a weapon in waiting, but as a constant. A presence that did not require instruction to act. A system that ensured that if conflict returned, it would be met before it could spread. The fleet understood then why the ship had not pursued them. Why it had not escalated beyond necessity. Its objective was not destruction for its own sake. It was containment. Correction. Continuation of a directive that had never changed. They extended their scans outward, beyond the immediate region, searching for similar signatures. At first, there was nothing. Then faint returns began to appear. Distant. Inactive. Watching. Not one. Not a few. Unknown. The ancient vessel reduced its output, the transmission fading as abruptly as it had begun. Its systems returned to low activity, energy once again minimized, presence diminished to near silence. From a distance, it became what it had seemed at first glance, an object drifting without purpose. But the fleet no longer saw it that way. They adjusted their course, not retreating in disorder, but withdrawing with precision. No further signals were sent. No attempts were made to re-engage or recover what had been lost. Distance increased. Observation remained. Behind them, the ship held its position for a measured interval, confirming the absence of immediate threat. Internal processes slowed, returning to baseline cycles refined over 1,000 years of uninterrupted function. It did not record victory. It did not assign meaning. It simply updated the environment as stable. And resumed waiting.